Hi everyone, this is Kelly and I am here to talk about Cartomancy, to talk about fortune-telling decks, I guess would be the way that people would sometimes describe them, although I think that's probably not the best descriptor of these types of cards, but let's kind of parse that out a little bit. And this is, I started actually to do this because I was working through the history of playing cards, prepping for class, and you know, all this stuff started coming up and I was pulling decks and I'm like, oh, I'm going to make a deck of these types of, just kind of running through the history of these types of decks. And then Miss Kelly Bear on one of my Instagram posts had said, oh, I'd love to see some of your fortune-telling style decks such as Madame Endora's. I think she mentioned Kadar, and I think she mentioned the Witchwood one. And I was like, yeah, I already have pulled a bunch of older decks. I'll pop some of those more recent decks in that video and try to get that up this week. So that's this video. So let's pause for a minute before we look at all these cool decks and do a little bit of a walk through history, because I think or sort of go broad and then go narrow, I guess is my thing. When you think about divination, right, that is a big category. So divination could include cartomancy, which is involving cards. That could also involve casting systems such as ohms and runes and charm casting and my fortune tokens, things that you would physically grab, shell casting, cowrie shell casting, these types of things where there's physical objects that you do, right? There's also other kinds of divination that take place that don't use those particular tools, right? So divination is a really broad term for seeking out answers, right? Underneath that umbrella, I would say technically all of the decks are oracle in the sense that they are providing an oracle between you and the cards, or the cards and your spirit guides, or whatever that you happen to be using them for. They're providing an oracle experience. You could also say that cartomancy as a term could cover tarot, oracle, Lenormand, Kipper, Sibylla, all of it, right? Because they involve cards. So there are different ways that you can classify. One of the things that is pretty easy is tarot, right? We know tarot. Tarot is a 78 card system. There are certain requirements for it to be tarot. It's going to have a major and minor arcana. It's probably going to have to some level of variation. It's going to have 4 suits with you know, some wands or sticks or batons, some coins, some pentacles, some rocks, some brain die, right? Some swords, some feathers, quills, those types of things, and then some cups or some chalices or some bowls, or sometimes even shells, right? So you're going to have 4 suits there, and so we pretty much can look at something and say, oh, that's a tarot deck. Now, on all these things that I say, there will be some exceptions. Dreams of Gaia, for example, might be an exception, as it does deviate a little bit in the major arcana. And so, you know, there's some exceptions to everything, or things that straddle the line. But for the most part, we can look at a tarot deck and we can say that's a tarot deck. Then we have modern oracle decks, which for me are often larger cards. They are often bound together by a particular theme. So you're going to have spirit animal oracle decks, or you're going to have angel oracle deck, or you might have a moon oracle deck that's all about the different signs of the moons, or I'm kind of looking over at my decks, which have, or you might have a shamanic and a mystic style oracle deck of surrounding in that particular theme. And so you have these cards that are generally used more in terms of supportiveness, and it often has centered around a theme, is kind of loosely what we think about oracle decks in a modern sense, right? For me, and this is just me, I think about a third subtext of divination, or of cartomancy with lots of cards, as being cartomancy. So for me, and this is not a classification that somebody else might use, but for my own self, when I think of cartomancy, I am more likely thinking of the types of things that other people might call fortune-telling decks. They tend to be playing card size. They tend to have some level of connection to playing card divination at its roots. They tend to be have a similar voice, where they tend to be a little bit more practical and a little bit more cheeky sometimes, and a little bit more fast feeling in terms of the way that you get in there and get your work done. That's what I term cartomancy, because fortune telling can be done with all of the things that we talked about, right? I can take a tarot deck and do fortune telling. I am reading mine or somebody else's fortune or their future. I can take an oracle deck and I can read fortune tell. I can take a playing card deck and I can tell fortunes, right? So for me, fortune telling is more of an act of what you're doing and less of a subset. So for me, cartomancy, right or wrong, it's just my own categorizing, is kind of what we're going to be looking at today, which are things that have their roots actually in playing cards and fortune-telling books or fortune books. What happened, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it, but you know, we have this line of playing cards, and can we also say tarot, you know, that came from the line of playing cards. So you can say cartomancy in general all sort of stem from the lovely playing card deck. I should actually have a regular playing card deck out here with these. So, but you had your playing cards here, and then there was a popularity in the 16th century of fortune books. And this is where these things started to come together in the middle, where they would use playing cards to take you to a page or an entry in a book, and and a question in a book, and then you would find your fortune by the combination of the playing card and the fortune book. So, but then those two began to marry, right? We have cartomancy, 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 fortune books combine cartomancy decks of playing cards and fortune books, and now we have this thread of fortune-telling decks that kind of come out from that marrying of the fortune books and the playing cards. And so again, this is very loose, right? I'm not trying to do a historical symposium on the exact way things came together, but in a general sense, you can see those meeting of those two things and the way that they go off and on and onward, even to today. We'll look at some more modern things after we clear this desk off a little bit. So I don't know how. There's really no nice way to do this. So we're in here having a conversation because it's fun to talk about decks. But you think about playing cards, and I'm going to insert a picture here because I don't have this deck, although I'll try to remember to put a link. You can actually purchase a reproduction of this deck just recently. And so it looks like a Mamaluke deck. This is an Islamic deck, so I'm probably not saying the word correctly. But it was a deck of cards that first came into Europe that had coins, cups, schmiters or swords, and I think they were polo sticks is what they were. So these were introduced in Spain in the 14th century, and then the Spanish and the Italians created decks with coins, cups, swords, and staffs, right? So there are with 52 cards and variations with 48 cards, and then later on you have it shifting where you have different decks that would have even less cards, like a scat deck in Germany would have, but it still has 32. You would have 36. I believe there were some with even less than that. So you would have a variation on the number of cards, and also the suits. You know, as we think of a playing card deck in the United States, as well as some other places as well, as 52 cards with hearts and diamonds and clubs and spades, there are different things like this beautiful, I love this deck, which is a scat deck, and it has bells and leaves and acorns and hearts for the suit titles. So you have different decks that are coming out, playing card decks. So we're talking about, you're talking in the 14th century, that is the 1300s, right? So that's when we're starting to see this here in Europe. So, in fact, what's interesting is that in Spain, the carder thing, so it's not too hard to figure out when playing cards became more popular in certain countries. They can look at receipts. They do have sort of invoice logs and things like that where they can tell when playing cards came about, right? And when they moved into Europe and that type of thing. The harder thing is obviously trying to figure out when do people start picking up a deck of cards and starting to use them for divination. Now, this is my non-professional guess, but my non-professional guess is as soon as a few people had a deck of cards in their hands, they were probably, somebody was using them for divination. I truly believe that for as long as there have been human beings, we have been picking up the things around us to use for divination, and cards, let's be honest, are just, you know, handmade or ripe for grabbing and using for divination. And so my guess is that very soon after people started getting these decks in their hands, they started using them for divination. But we know in Spain that there have been professional card readers since the 16th century, which would be the 1500s. The first text to describe divination with cards is by Juego de Napes. I'm not sure that's N-A-Y-P-E-S. And it was called the game, which means the game of cards, by Fernando de la Torre in 1450. And this describes divination with cards. So we're in the 1400s here. And there was a one published in Germany in 1505. So again, in the early 1500s. So we know that playing cards were being used for divination in those time periods. Now, what's happened along the way, these are not reproductions here, but what happened along the way is that fortune books became popular in the 15th century, or 16th century, sorry. Some books used cards, playing cards, as we're talking about, dice, a wheel, certain things that were used in order to reference them. But for example, this is called The Lady's Oracle, and this is by Cornelius Agrippa, who did a lot of things with divination and different types of divination. This one actually has a table to where you could close your eyes, stick your finger on it, go to your questions, and then find out what your answer is by finding that here. So this is an example of what it would use in order for you to find it. Whereas another book might have you pick a playing card, shuffle, 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 pick a playing card, and then say, okay, well, here is the King of Hearts, and so I'm going to go to the question. They often had lists of questions, so you would find the question. So for example, let's see. I think that this is a whole chart ones. These are signs corresponding so you can easily find it. Here are the lists of questions. So here are a list of questions. Shall I soon be courted? You know, am I going to find love? You know, people have always been asking that question. Okay, well, go to the King of Hearts, which is not in here. I'm just using it for example. Okay, I'm going to find the King of Hearts, and this is my answer because I pulled the King of Hearts. So there would be books like this. I don't think this one uses anything. Let's see what this one. This is Titanius Oracle, which again uses that thing. Here is a list of 100, are there more? Nope, 100 questions. And this has a wheel. And I think, did this come with the wheel? I cannot even, oh no, it's like a table. I can't even remember how I would have to go through and read it, but somehow you would have this, and so then you would find your answer, and then you would get your answer there. So that's another way to do that. This is actually a newer book that I love when I was fascinated with fortune books. Ask your question, find your fate, right? And so this one, how to use it, let's see. It's designed to be spontaneous, just like poetry itself. So the guidance is to set the book on a flat surface. For questions of more serious nature, candlelight is recommended, of course, because that makes everything, right? Close your eyes, concentrate on your question. When you've taken the time to really focus, start flipping through, and bam, okay, here it is, a quote. These are quotes, or pieces of, I think these are pieces of poems. I'm not entirely sure. If God invited you to a party and said, everyone in the ballroom tonight will be my special guest, how would you then treat them when you arrived? Indeed, indeed. So you're treating people, you know, in a special way because God has proclaimed that they are going to be special. So shouldn't you just treat everybody that way? Depending on your question, you would interpret it based off of this quote, right? So this is just a modern one, but I just wanted to show you they were still making them. But for the purposes of our conversation here, one of the ways in which you would pick your fortune and get your answer was by doing this, by pulling a playing card. And so we started to see cards being associated with these fortune books. I'm not going to wrestle with that right now. But then what happened was they started to make decks that would have the information right on the card. So now we didn't have to have the book and a deck of cards. We could just have a deck of cards. The oldest known deck, as far as I'm aware, again, this is not like a historical symposium, was John Lentils' fortune-telling cards, which was in 1665. This was a 52-card deck and kept up being produced until 1712. Now, it's important to say that there wasn't at this point any consistent meanings to playing card divination. That's a whole nother conversation, right, about playing card divination. But there was no consistency in terms of this is what this card means. It can vary depending on who's taught who. My grandma taught me to read it this way, and this is how I read it. There was no consistency in terms of the meanings. And so that the meanings on one deck were not going to then translate to another deck. Each deck was its own little system inherently, and or book deck combo, and it didn't, just because you learned that one didn't mean you could pick up another deck and do, you know, figure out the other deck. Now, in 1770, there was a book called the Experience Fortune Book, and this actually had meanings for each card in a standard deck of cards. That way you could pick up any deck of cards and apply their meanings to it. And we start to see things start to get a little bit standardized. And it didn't have a list of questions for the first time, like many of the books had list of questions, set questions, and then these are the answers to these set questions. That started to open it up where people could just ask any question and then be able to use the cards in order to get an answer. And again, personally, I believe they were doing that long before that as well, but it wasn't in the published books. It was people sitting at home with their own pack of cards and doing them, right? we start to then get to some of the systems and decks that we, in a modern sense, are aware of and we've heard of them and or even worked with them, such as Sibylla decks. Sorry, I've got a pile of Sibylla decks here. We'll look at those in a minute. Those were being created in Italy, France, and Germany, Austria, Hungary, since the 1700s. And we do have sort of a deviation here at some point where morality cards were made. And I think, if I were to guess, this would be a little bit more similar to a morality card. And this is where there would be sort of scenes or a moral on each of the card. And the idea was that you would pull it as sort of a moral that you would sit with. Similar, very similar to how we look at, I think, modern Oracle decks probably stemmed a little bit more from those morality cards, where you have this idea that you would pull a particular card, such as there was somebody named Lentils proverb playing cards in like the early 1710s to 1720 that would, you would pull and have sort of a moral of the day, which is similar to how we will take some modern Oracle decks and have a card of the day, and we would sit with that energy of that card for the day or for the week or whatever that would be. And we would definitely, we can see that connection there. From what we can tell, the oldest oracle of that type of Oracle deck would be Hooper's conversational cards from 1775 that had 56 morally descriptive pictures and titles. So we're having that in the later so we have Sibylla cards all throughout the 1700s. We have morality cards coming out in the 1700s, and definitely a very firm morality deck in 1775. We have the Earl of Norman coming out in the late 1700s, 1799-ish, 98, 99. I think that's kind of questionable, but this was the game of hope, right? So this was, as of right now, this is the oldest Lenormand deck that we know of, but I believe it references to a edition before this, so we know that it actually came out before this time period, because this was a second edition of it. And this does have the inserts of French and German cards, but they aren't put on there for any use of divination. They are so that you can have a one-stop shop. Here you go, take this deck. You can play the Game of Hope, which was a game. You can play any of the games that you can play with a German deck, and you can play any of the card games that you would play with a French deck. And so this was just like a one-stop game, and then, with a little, but you can also pull these cards with a little bit of divination. So we have Lenormand coming out. In the later 1800s, we had Kipper coming out. And I know I'm going through this quick. I'm just trying to give you sort of an idea of this kind of pathway from playing cards and fortune decks, fortune books coming together, and sort of this plethora of fortune-telling style decks, or what I call Cartomancy decks, coming from that, just to get, just because I find it all fascinating. The late 19th century, so late 1800s as well, when you're seeing Kipper decks, you also started to see Gypsy style decks that were called like Gypsy Witch deck. I feel like I have somewhere else another deck that's this is a Gypsy fortune telling deck. This is a more modern deck by Ray Buckland. We'll again come talk about all these, but I know I have other decks that are labeled like Gypsy decks. You have also the Whitman deck coming out that was like an expanded Lenormand. Some of the Gypsy decks start now. The Gypsy Witch does have playing cards, but some of the Gypsy style decks, and this is what they were called, so I'm not using the term Gypsy to refer to Gypsy people or Romany people, but these were called Gypsy Witch or Gypsy style decks or Gypsy fortune cards. And a lot of times that you started to see them getting away from playing cards. So like Kipper does not have playing card connection. Yes, it's still a 36 card deck like Lenormand, but it doesn't have any of the playing card insets on there. It is just its own system there, as is Lenormand. I don't believe that the playing cards were there for divinatory purposes. It was just so that you would have a 3-in-1 game. And so basically Kipper has stripped away that game aspect and left just that Lenormand kind of style in the middle there. The actual Gypsy Witch fortune-telling cards were in 1903, but this is definitely more of a Lenormand with extra cards thrown in, so it's a variant of Lenormand. And then of course from there we start getting all kinds of Cartomancy style, fortune-telling style decks just boomed everywhere. So I'm going to put this down and we'll look at some of these. Let me put these, there's something in here that is causing this to not close properly. So I'm going to put the playing cards away because today's discussion is not so much about playing cards as it is about all of these wonderful things that came out of this sort of union of fortune books and playing cards, and then sort of ran off and did its own thing as well. So we talked about, let's go to Sibylla next, because Sibylla kind of would have been the earlier ones. This is a beautiful copy of the Sibylla Original from 1890, and this was, I think, from Milan. My friend Bart found this in an auction and got it for me, and it is, I just love this. So this is a reproduction by Il Menegalo, and of the, if I can get it out, of the Sibylla Original, which is 1890, and it's a beautiful, I love the images on this. The only thing that I don't particularly like about this version is that it is, you can see it's on glossy cardstock, and so it doesn't shuffle up. I'm not going to shuffle this because I keep this one, I think, in, or no, it doesn't, yeah, I think this might be, yeah, I think that's an order of the suits. So I love this. The images from this one I absolutely love for Sibylla, but I don't tend to use this one. If you pick up the Vera Sibylla Italiana or the Everyday Oracle, which you could, last I knew, you could get this on on Amazon. And this has the same images. So I tend to, when I'm reading with Sibylla, this is my favorite to use, as well as another one, which I'll show you in a second. Sibylla is definitely one of, I do love Sibylla. It's a very, I find all Cartomancy style. Remember, my definition of Cartomancy are basically these types of oracle decks that are generally playing card size and generally stem from these types of things that we're talking about. I find them to be a little bit sassy, a little bit cheeky, a little bit blunt, definitely practical. Like, you just have the sense that these are the cards that people were sitting at home with and working out, you know, the everyday problems. The Sforza Tarot, the Madrone Tarot, these beautiful gold gilded works of arts were not decks that people in the street were using, right? And you can tell that it has that sense of affluence and about them. And even if you think about the major arcana, which is of course missing in any deck stemming from playing cards, has that sort of, okay, well, this is people who are sitting and thinking about philosophy and these big archetypal sweeps and stories and things, whereas these archetypes are present in the masses, but they want to know, am I going to get food tomorrow? Am I going to, you know, is my husband going to come back from the boating trip? Are they going to bring fish? Are they going to come back alive? Is my child going to survive this particular round of plague that's going through? Like, there's a lot more down in the dirt of life feeling about playing card, and for me, about playing card and fortune-telling style decks. And so that lends them a practicality and a bluntness, a sense of humor, which of course you can also definitely find in historical tarot decks. please. The major arcana for many historical decks just are, you know, show a beautiful sense of humor on all levels. But just, I'm really generalizing here on how they feel and how they tend to read for me. So the Everyday Oracle, as I said, are the same images. These are not in order, but they are the same images that are there, but this is, you know, much easier to shuffle. Obviously, you don't have to worry about ruining a beautiful keepsake, so it stays kind of up with my historical decks, and this is the one that I would actually use, and it's easy to get. These are cheap. You know, fortune-telling style decks like this, Cartomancy decks, are fairly cheap things to pick up. I also like this. To see again, this is Gypsy Oracle cards, or Sibylla Dea Singara. I'm sure I'm slaughtering these. They sometimes have multiple, of course, different languages, because a lot of these are Low Scarabeo. Oops, I'm missing one of them. This is a nice one because it has English titles so you have things like misfortune, haughtiness, you have the merchant, you have sorrow, you have death, you have hope, you have cheerfulness, but you also have melancholy. You have servants, and you have rich ladies and poor people and soldiers, and the mercantile, as we already talked about here. You have foes. You have female foes and male foes. You have letters, old people, young people. It's just kind of, you've got people getting sick. You've got people in service. You've got all... Lady Fortune loves to show up in fortune-telling style decks. And so this is just a nice one because, again, you've got, if you're an English speaker, as I am, you have the English title. This has been trimmed. So I really do like this one as well because it does have those English titles there. So Gypsy Oracle cards, this is by Low Scarabeo. A lot of them are. This is a beautiful one, again, that my friend Bart sent me. This is called Antica Sibylla Italiana. Doesn't have any other name. This is, again, Low Scarabeo. This actually came with a book. This is beautiful. And this, you know, it does have playing card insets on it. It came with a book, of course. It is in Italian, which I do not speak, but I do love these cards. I just feel like they feel very like Jane Austen-esque. Just ladies and lords and gentlemen in their drawing rooms kind of feel to that one. I'm not going to probably open all of these things up, but you even have, this is a little bit more modern, although again I don't think modern. A lot of these I don't know exactly when they were produced and whether or not they were reproductions or not. This is 2007, but whether or not this was a reproduction, I don't think so. But this is the Eros Oracle. So this is sort of like a Sibylla Oracle, but it's all around love, embrace, dominion, pleasure, indifference, mischief, coyness, fear, passion, caress, provocation. This is all based upon love and sensuality and sexuality and those types of things. So they have these decks just, you know, sprouted wings, and you have tons of them. This is a beautiful one. 52 cards show how it is possible to tell the future. And you do get lots of things like that in the verbiage and in the marketing, is, you know, how to tell your fortunes and these types of things. So this is a nice one because it does have the 4 languages, but you do get the English as well, and there are card inserts, right? So we have the male and the female consultant, a lot of money, angry women, people that are absent, revelations occurring, tenderness, visits are happening. There's more people here involved. This feels a little kippery, right? You've got gamblers, you've got inconsistency happening, and quarrels and weakness, people being childlike, widows and widowers, presents and money, you know, different types of gaining money, taking journeys, these types of things. You see many of the same themes that cross a lot of these decks. In terms of the cards that you'll see great fortune, you'll often see a seductress, you might see a thief, you might see, you know, winning a lot of money, you might see something about work, various different people. There's a lot of people involved in many Sibylla and Kipper style decks that you'll see. This is a beautiful Lejeune Destin Antique. This is a beautiful one. My friend Itzy sent me. Just absolutely gorgeous. And this just has scenes on it with playing cards. So this is really beautiful. Most of you know, you're seeing kind of a split between where they come, whether the size, what the size of the deck tends to come from, where did it come from, and what is their traditional set of playing cards, and so things can change. This is a Lenormand deck. This is a this is a 36 card, so this is a Lenormand-esque. Where we have the journey, a gift. Again, a lot of the same symbols that they would argue, I think, or guess that a lot of these symbols that we see repeated were also ones that were used in tea readings and coffee ground readings, and they sort of transposed these on. So here we have constancy and the judge and merriment and the widow and the baby, and so on and so forth. It's just, again, another version of fortune-telling cards. So, and there's lots of them. Gypsy Witch is probably, I know I get still on my old video, people are like, oh, this is the best deck ever, why don't you love it? It's not my favorite by any means. It's not a deck I really use. A lot of it's the aesthetics of it. It's just the coloration that was because of the printing. It's just not appealing to me whatsoever. The very heavy yellow tones. I think there's only yellow and black and red, and so then the mixtures of those just tends to be kind of muddy. But you will get cards that are similar to Lenormand, and then you will get, say, the pig card. This is a common card that would come out in fortune-telling decks, and so you'll see that. The handshake one, which I love a lot. The rose, you'll see. Wine, the rapiers there. Cats, and of course the dog, as we're familiar with. The eye. So you'll see in Gypsy Witch type card decks, you'll see a lot of these, and again, the Whitman, I think it's called the Whitman fortune-telling deck. It's the Whitman something. You'll see in the modern decks that you can get a hold of, which you can get a hold of the Gypsy Witch easily, like Robert M. Place's the Hermes playing card deck. This is a Lenormand card deck but it's a full 52 card deck that also has other cards that were pulled like the Whitman card. So you will see the pig and you will see shaking hands. And so this has a full-size playing card with the image there. So that's a candle. This is the clouds card in Lenormand. You have the bee card. You have the fish card here. You have the path card. You have the lilies card. You'll have the kind of cupids. There's the ring, the rider, you know, so on and so forth. So there's the dog there, but you'll also see a cat or a lamb, and the eye, there's the eye there. And so you'll see in the two decks that I love, because they pull all of these imageries that you would see in, say, Gypsy Witch style decks, is the this one, which is the Hermes Playing Card Oracle by Robert M. Place, as well as the Maybe Lenormand. Now, I have the US Games version, but you know, I have to show you this because the artist, this is hand-painted version he did first, and then eventually you were able to get it from, I think it's US Games. And this is a wonderful example because, again, here's the rose card. So you have the traditional not this one, but you have the traditional Lenormand cards, but then you have the extra cards that you would get, like Bacchus, that you would get in, like the lion card, and you'll see that the cat card, the eye card, the pig card. So you'll see these, and so you can, what's wonderful about these is you get, and again, I love the US Games version. I just didn't pull that out because of, obviously this is a treat and a joy for me on this raw paper. But the point is that you can pick up the maybe Lenormand and the Hermes playing cards, and you have, you know, access to a full playing card for playing card divination. You have Lenormand if you just take out the 36 Lenormand cards, or you have a full fortune-telling style, cartomancy style 52 card deck as well. So I think this makes this one of those great cards sets to be able to take with you. Like when I went out of town recently to go visit my sister, I was just not going to be gone very long. They don't, you know, that side of the family doesn't do anything with fortune telling or tarot or anything of that nature, so I didn't really need it. But you know, you want to have something, and so I took the Hermes playing card because it has everything you need. Playing cards are bam right there. I can just read playing cards the way I normally do, or I can take the 36, or I have the whole set. So this is like a amazing little decks. This and the maybe Lenormand, I think are awesome to get if you just want to dip your feet into cartomancy style decks. I would definitely recommend the maybe Lenormand or the Hermes style playing card to kind of have the, and this is, to me, these style decks are in the spirit of the Earl of Norman, right, where you had German, French playing cards, and you had the Game of Hope, and then yay, you can do a little bit of divination if you'd like to. Same thing, you can play King's Corners with the Hermes playing card deck. You can do some playing card divination, you can do some Lenormand divination, but you can also play all the games that you can play with a 52 card deck. So this is really in the spirit, right, of this deck from the late 1700s, and so I love the connection between these two decks, and kind of going back to this sort of spirit of, yes, this can be used for games, but yes, this can be used for divination, and how awesome is that? So to speak. So I'm going to stop babbling about all of that and move these a little bit out of the way here and talk a little bit about some of the more modern decks. Again, maybe Lenormand and the Hermes playing cards are modern decks that you can get. A lot of these you can get, but what I mean is they're modern productions and you can get them. Again, this looks like it was $20. I think you have to go to Robert M. Place's website to pick up this. The maybe Lenormand, you can't get it this way, but you can get it on Amazon. If you just look up the maybe Lenormand, you can get it on Amazon or US Games website. So they're decks that you can get and do a lot of work with. Other more modern, what I would call cartomancy style decks that I love, and this is what sparked Kelly Bears, is sort of the Madame Endor's fortune cards. If you've watched my channel, you know I've talked about this deck. I just love this deck. It's an oracle deck, but it feels like a cartomancy. You have keys and dragons. You have the 4 elements. You have hindrances that happen. You have chalices and golems, and I don't know. This deck is one of those decks that this is the largest probably, this and one other. So this kind of doesn't fit my criteria because it's a larger size deck, but it still has that sense of, I do get the embrace the magical feel with this deck, where I just feel like I should, you know, be in a tent with silks and things and crystal balls, and it's my inner mystic just comes out to play with this deck, and it's an amazing reading deck. But it has, in terms of reading it, it has that very cartomancy style feel to the way that you read with this. So this is a modern deck that I highly recommend, and it's one of my all-time favorites because it fills my heart with joy, and it's an amazing reader. This would have been, I believe, probably from a Kickstarter. Somebody sent me this, but this is Kadar, or Kadar. I trimmed this one because I use it with the, oh, there's a Circus Tarot and Oracle deck. I'm going to forget the name of it, but I like to use it with this instead of like Lenormand. But it has sort of like you were going to pull a ticket out of a machine. You know, you were going to go to where they had those little those animatronics in a booth, and you put your quarter in, and then you got a fortune that came out. But it's playing card based, but it has on the side upright and reverses on each of the sides. I love this deck. I don't believe that you can get this currently. I'm not positive of that, but I don't think so. But this is, I think, an amazing modern creation of a very embrace again, that sort of magical, mystical world of fortune telling in a way that and reads really fantastic, that I love. Let's see. You know, I actually also consider L'Oracle de Reflets, which is by Celia Malsville. I don't even know if this is still available. I know she's got a couple tarot decks out right now. But this has a significator, and this has a very cartomancy feel to it, even though it's Oracle. But it reads very much like, it feels like where you have a tree, and you have a refuge, and you have conditioning, and you have deadly, is this deadly things? I can't read right now because duality, sorry. You have the rice bowl. So you have these like simple things, and it reads, when you read it, it has that very much that cartomancy style feel to it. It's hard to explain what I mean by that. I think that once you start to read like that, you kind of will know what I'm talking about. This is a deck that you can get on Etsy called the Witchwood Oracle. Love this deck so much. This just has the definitions right here, but most of these decks you can pick up and look at it, and you don't really need to go deep to figure it out, right? So the Horseshoe card here, we know horseshoes are about luck. Let's just see, 20 something. So let's go down here to, what is this? 21. The horseshoe, good luck, peace, contentment. Reversed is the opposite of that, right? It makes sense. The hand, there's so much you can do with that. The rat, what is the rat stealing away from you? The wand having to do with the magic. The snake, the lady, the witch, the lord, death, the eye, the wolf. I mean, this is awesome. The tree, the black cat, the dagger. You would even say this about the Mildred Payne Pocket Oracle. Very much feels like it's in the vein of these style decks as well. The owl. I'm 90% sure that this is a deck that you can still get, but I can't promise that. I haven't looked. The feather, the stranger, the compass, right? This is this just tickled me pink when this came out, because again, it feels like Madame Endora, but it reads really well. It's balanced. It reads well. It gives you the messages that you need to get. That's a great, more modern rendition of these style decks. You know, there's other ones that sort of skirt the line. Some modern decks that I feel in the same vein. Sort of like the Curious Oracle. This one rides for me in between because it fits my criteria of being playing card size. This is being re-put out. I think it's not out right this minute, but it is coming back. But it's cartomancy. It has shields and thistles and blackbirds and masks and the White Queen. This is definitely a little more leaning to the mystic side. Definitely leaning a little bit more to the Oracle, going to the Oracle of Delphi or something of that nature. It's a little less in the muck and the mire and a little bit more on the spiritual plane of things. But it hugs that line between between cartomancy and Oracle. Same thing with the Cartes Divinatories d'Algrol. I know this was republished, so I know that you can still get this. This doesn't even have titles on it, but you have like the mask, and you have doorways, and you have towers and owls and skulls, right? It's just awesome. Candles and passageways and all kinds of things. That I love the curtain one that's pulled back, and keys. So this to me very much feels like a Cartomancy style deck that leans a little bit more to what we would consider Oracle today. That leans a little bit more towards this. I think leans a little bit more towards, they have a lot of in the guidebook about reading for past lives and things like that. So it leans like this one. It shifts a little bit more towards the spiritual end versus just getting in there and doing, you know, the down and dirty, get some reading done. This is a newer deck, the Illuminated playing cards. This was a very large deck. I need to do a review of this, but this is great because it has just two of the same decks. One's light and one's darker, but this is a playing card deck, so it's a 52 card playing card deck, but it also has the minors and majors of tarot sort of combined in cards, where you'll have the 7 here of spades, which seems to be connected to the Chariot, but then it would also have the 7 of swords connotations lined in there as well. And it comes with a little booklet which just gives you the basic 3 of diamonds, craftsmanship, successful collaboration, and admiration. But it's basically pulling from Cartomancy and tarot and sort of putting them together. But you do have a full deck of cards here that you could play a game with, but then you can tap into, and this is definitely tapping into tarot specifically, and this is just 2 of the same deck. In light and dark. But I love, love, love this. This just recently came out. It has game attached to it, but it also has a tarot guide. So it goes to the heart of these original decks. Again, I just always go back to the beloved Earl of Norman, that spirit of, sure, you can play a game of spades or whatever, you know, pinnacle or whatever you're going to play with a set of cards. Me, it's just King's Corners mostly. But you can play games, but then, yeah, we can pick this up and we can do some divination. Let's get some answers while we're at it. This sort of plays to that same thing, much like the maybe Lenormand and the Hermes playing card Oracle. And then, of course, if you've watched my channel at all, you probably know that I'm obsessed with the Open Portals playing card. This is a brand new system, so this isn't repeating tarot or reproducing any of these sets. It's a new system that is fully made to play as a game. Straight up has all the instructions to play this as a game, but it has full instructions also of how to use these decks, and there's just 2 of them, 2 different color variations, to be able to use these in divination. And it just, to me, is awesome, where you have, again, full set of playing cards. You can play any card game that you can play with a 52 card deck, or the game Open Portals, or you can use the titles here to be able to read it in a divination way. And this is very specifically, in a modern sense, created for that dual purpose, which again does, plus the production value. This is by James Eade, E-A-D, and this is by the artist who created the Prisma Visions and the Light Visions tarot, and he has a Lenormand deck coming out that I cannot wait for, that looks just really cool. This is just a black. I started with the dark version. I did this on Kickstarter. I couldn't, I have a hard time because of my eyesight. I have a hard time reading the red on the black, and so I love this, but when I read with this, I actually use the light version because it's easier for my eyes to read. But this is, like, to me, this is a modern, that goes into the spirit of, you know, where all of this started. So I love that. So yeah, life is interesting, right? The world of divination is so many little pockets and corners of things, and it's just a joy to travel down a rabbit hole. Like, there's so many other rabbit holes to travel down, but here's one of them. And I hope this was of interest to people who love this type of thing, or just to anybody who just wants to take a look at a bunch of really neat variations on the way that people put cards together across different countries, different cultures, different time periods, all for the sake of asking those questions that they most want to ask in that moment. And I think that is pretty cool. So hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.